Well, here we are. I'm joined by the amazing Pete Greig. And Pete, before we get into all this kind of stuff in this podcast, I want to ask you the most important question that I could possibly ask you. And that is football coming home?
Oh my goodness. Oh, Josh, I want to say yes. I want to say yes. I think we're going to do all right. I think what I like is that our expectations are set fairly low. I mean, if we can get to the quarterfinals, I'll be happy. Semi, I'll be very happy. That's a big dilemma for me because, I'm half Scottish.
This is why I asked.
So, yeah, so I do support England. That's always a tough one. I just kind of keep quiet with all my relatives.
We'll just have the rivalry in the comments below. People can just go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, moving swiftly on to Preach What You Practice, which is a book that I've been working on that my dad is proofreading at the moment. And it's all about encouraging people to live authentic, honest, integral, vulnerable Christian lives. And the kind of thing that I've seen you do, to me, you always seem to try and be authentic as possible and try to be yourself, although you are really passionate about what you do. So I'm wondering, and I wanted to ask you, what power do you think authenticity holds for us as Christians? And why do you think that authenticity is important?
Oh, Josh, it's such an important question because what else have we got but the truth? One of the things that really worries me about some of what's been happening in America over the last few years is people seem to not be taking truth seriously anymore. Truth is just like, whatever you want to believe. And we're many the people of the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And it seems to me that means we have to have an integration between our private selves and our public. There was a really key moment for Sammy and me in this when Sammy got pregnant with our first kid, our first boy, Hudson. We were given this advice: you shouldn't tell the church until she's, 3 months, gone, because it's like if you lose the baby or, it's a vulnerable time. I remember we talked about it. It was just one of those little chats, which I now look back on and realize was a defining moment. And we said, you know what? If we're called to lead, we've got to lead out of the private place of our lives. And right now we're celebrating, so we want our church community to celebrate with us. And if we have to grieve, we'll grieve with them too.
Wow.
And so we told them, it wasn't like, immediately, it was like in the first probably 6 weeks in, like, we're pregnant. And this was a church mostly made up of people in their like teens and 20s. And so not many people had babies. Everyone was just stoked. And I now look back and realize that was a positioning moment where, and actually some people will know we've had to do a lot of grieving, and we've chosen to be very honest about our questions and our struggles. I think that was probably one of the key moments for us in taking that position. And also, Josh, I don't have the energy to pretend like these people who project this big blah 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 thing out there. Like, the Bible's so honest. I just feel like we need to be the same.
Wow, I love that. That's a tweet right there.
There you go.
But so one of the things you've been working on is this Lectio 365 that's been going around. My wife loves it. We do it sometimes before bed, and a whole group of us in our church do it as well. And one of the quotes that came through recently, which I absolutely love, was let preachers and worship leaders step out of the limelight into the twilight to fix the spotlight entirely on you. I just love that idea, that imagery, and it makes me think of what you were talking about, this sort of unnerving rise of celebrity culture that's, I don't know if I want to say got into the church, because it might have been in the church sort of before my time, but it certainly seems to be becoming more and more obvious, evident, this green room celebrity culture. Not that necessarily green rooms are wrong, but you know what I mean, this rise of the pastor's a celebrity, like what you were touching on before. Like, Preach What You Practice is all about private first, public second. And when we focus on our private life, our devotion before God, our private spirituality and discipline, that's what actually authenticates and authorizes the public.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And I just wonder if you could maybe unpack that statement a little bit more. I don't know if it was you who said it or what it was.
Yeah, I think I wrote that. And yeah, I mean, the journey with Lectio, thanks for your kind comments on that, has been nuts. It's been crazy. Although I wish someone sensible like you had sat me down at the start and said, Pete, have you actually thought what it means to write one of these every day, like forever? It's a nightmare. But anyway, I mean, it's gone from 0 to 200,000 daily users or something now. It's just gone crazy.
Wow.
I think that the celebrity culture thing amongst pastors has got worse, actually. I think there is an epidemic of narcissism in the church. And whilst we're really strong on sins, sexual sins, for example, rightly, we turn a blind eye if our leaders are proud or self-referenced. And yet the Bible says, pride's basically the worst sin. And yet kind of it's okay, for a preacher to show off or to make everything about them and not to be serving, putting out the chairs. Like how did that value system come in? If we look at what's happened with Hillsong in New York City with Carl Lentz, who's, incredibly gifted guy, unbelievably gifted, so grateful to God for so much of what he's done over the years. But he clearly got into this space of complete deception, first of all, with himself and with God, and secondly, with his marriage and ultimately with his church. And the kind of contract was this: he's the guy who hangs out with Justin Bieber and looks really cool. So if I feel insecure, forgotten, or uncool, by somehow being associated with him, I feel a bit more cool, and I even feel that my gospel is a bit more credible. Right there's a really toxic contract, right? And then Carl Lentz himself plays up to it, and you end up with this complete void where the guy's, behaving without any integrity. And then, of course, the tragedy is that people like that fall, and it affects people in their relationship with God. We were never meant to lodge our relationship with God in human leaders, right? Read the Bible. I mean, the Apostle Peter tried to talk Jesus out of the cross. So I think the narcissism has got wrong. And anyone listening to this who aspires to lead, I want to say to you, cling on to your friends at all costs. And if you find that every 5 years you churn, you have a new set of friends, you don't have real friends. You have acquaintances you hang out with and have emotional experiences with. Friendship must last. In 24/7, our greatest achievement in more than 20 years of non-stop prayer in more than half the nations on earth is this: most of us are still friends. That's easily our biggest achievement. And behind the scenes, we put a lot of work into that. I always remember near the start, I got to preach. It was back, there was this band called Delirious, and they were rocking it out on the seafront in their hometown, Littlehampton, which is a funny little place, and they were getting thousands. And they asked me to come and preach the gospel. And it was a big gig, it was thousands of people. Delirious were on the up. Channel 4 was filming, and at the end, people got saved, and I baptized them on the spot in a paddling pool. It was great. And I kind of felt like I did well. I went to the pub afterwards with my friend Dan. I said to him, how did you think I did? I was basically fishing for compliments, I'll be honest with you. I wanted him to go, Pete, you're a rock star, right? And Dan took one look at me and said, I thought you looked an idiot because it was raining and you had sunglasses on. That was his one piece of feedback. That was it. I'm like, thanks. But you know what? He could tell I didn't actually need any encouragement. I mean, I wanted it, but I didn't need it. Here's the thing. When I got the news that Sammy had a brain tumor and it looked like she was going to die, Dan was the guy who came around and prayed and wept with me into the night. So that's one of the biggest keys to an authentic life, is friends who tell you the truth. And when you're getting a bit big on yourself, big-headed, they pull you down. One of the things I like about British culture, and I particularly like it about male culture, is there can be a healthy, taking the mickey. Like I've heard talks from places like Bethel saying it's wrong ever to take the mickey. They just don't understand. They just are wrong. Like it's an important tool for, guys do need to be kept humble. But what you want is those same people to be the ones who lift you up and build you up when you're broken and you're down. And so I think for me, it's been the consistency of friendships that it's meant that when I've got a big preach, I'm like, do you know what? If I do really well, great. If I do really badly, everyone will have forgotten in 6 months' time, but my friends will still be my friends. I'm going to find my security not in my job, not in how strangers perceive me, but in the depth of long-term friendships that I sustain.
Wow, I love that. I hadn't fully thought about that. That's incredible. That's why being in community is so important. Hey, being in church.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, obviously, I became a Christian when I was 18. Really gave my life to Christ then.
I know, amazing story, Josh.
Yeah,
unbelievable. Hearing your mum singing in the police cell. Come on.
Honestly, that's what takes me back every time. Takes me back to the foot of the cross. Is just, that miracle moment. The Galatians talks about a revelation. The gospel didn't come to me by man, but by a revelation of Jesus. And that's what's incredible to me. But I feel like sometimes we've moved away from some of that in church because of the performance thing. Like everything's now a performance. Worship is a performance of music. Prayer is a performance with a microphone up at the front. Since I've become a Christian, I've noticed that sometimes, I've done events all over the world, and all the time and preparation is spent on the image, the look, the stage. There's a stage for you, and there's a microphone, and all this money spent on the platform and the lights and the cameras and all that kind of stuff. And then there's sort of a 5-minute prayer before the event starts, and then off we go. And so, I just find it really interesting. But so for me, like, I've always found that my relationship with God, that prayer and that holiness, is sort of that number one fuel source for everything I do in the public. And I don't do it to sort of be better in the public. I do it just for my relationship with God. But I just wonder if you could maybe, obviously you do 24/7 prayer, because I think there's a little bit of a separation between the idea of prayer and living a life of holiness, because of the whole performance side of prayer is something that I do up on a stage, or worship is a song. I just wonder how you see and unpack the link between prayer and living a holy and integral life before God, because for me, I can't live holy and integral without my lifestyle of prayer. And so I wonder if that's an interesting sort of insight, because prayer has somehow become this performance. And so holiness and integrity is drifting away because personal and private prayer hasn't been stoked in a Christian's life.
Yeah, I think you've answered your own question. I yes and amen. I agree. And I think there's this thing that the early church used to say. It's in Latin, but it's like, I guess it would have been a tweet at the time: lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. Okay, so that means, lex means the law, the rule. Okay, so lex orandi, that's the law of prayer. Lex credendi, that's the law or the rule of belief. Credendi as in creeds. And then lex vivendi, well, that's the law of life. How, like anything with revive in it is life. Okay, so what those 6 words meant was this: the way you pray determines what you believe, and what you believe determines what you live. We mostly flip that. Was I belong and I believe and I behave, or whatever that thing is. And actually, what those early church mothers and fathers were saying is, your prayer, it's not like, I'm going to believe this thing and now I've got to do this thing called prayer. Prayer is what happens when you're alone with God. Out of your prayer life, your beliefs flow, and out of your beliefs, you live right. So you want to talk about authentic or integrated life. Prayer is the key. I mean, a lot of people, it's like they've bought themselves a Ferrari, but they've only got enough gas in the tank for one, spin around. So like, prayer is continually getting refueled. We have an incredible world. We have an incredible God. We have incredible bodies. We have, incredible opportunities. But without prayer, you got no fuel in the tank. So, it's absolutely the key. And I always say, you probably heard me say it, Josh, but we don't pray to get people saved. We get people saved so they can pray. So, like, one day There'll be no more, stages to stand on. There'll be no more churches to plant. There'll be no more human trafficking to fight. Like, none of it. No more sicknesses to heal. No more evangelism to do. None of it. So and that's heaven.
Yeah.
I sometimes rib Andy Hawthorne and go, he just lives for the lost, right? Like, dude, is Jesus going to have to let a few non-Christians in just to stop you getting bored? Like what will there be in that moment and in that space? And what there is left is your actual connection and communication with God, worship and prayer. Or let me flip that a tiny bit. What is there in the split second before the flat line? When it doesn't matter what your job was, what you looked like, how many extra pounds you were carrying, how many pounds you got in the bank, it's irrelevant. You're about to die.
Yeah.
In that moment, there's you and God, and you better know what that looks like. And the way you can answer that question is to have spent your life investing into a real relationship with God. So someone said to me, and I think it's true, anything you do more in public than in private is hypocrisy, right? So like, if I pray more in public than in private, if I worship more in public than in private, that's an interesting one, right? Because we go to church, we worship for, I don't know, what do you say, half an hour? Are you spending more than that just alone in worship during the week? And then I think you can flip that. If everything that you do in private then gets broadcast publicly, you're a fake. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to go on a sabbatical in September, 3 months. I'm going to get one of those old Nokia phones. It might have Tetris on it, but that's it. It's like this thing will be ugly. I won't have a smartphone. I won't do any screens. And can I be honest with you? One of my fears I've had to process is God. I haven't got loads of social media followers, but I've got, tens of thousands across different, platforms. I'm like, I'm going to lose 3 months of silence. It's taken me years to build that up, and it's really handy when you write books. I'm going to lose thousands of followers. Do you know what I mean? It's okay, let's push into that. Let's process what that is. Let's go there. Let's step into the shadows and realize, well, one day you're going to drop dead. So what's going to happen to your social media profile then? Just let's push into stuff that's real and not take everything that's private and feel it's got to be broadcast for everyone else.
So good. We've been on furlough with the band, so our social media is just consistently going.
Yeah.
I feel the pain.
One of the things I find after being around the block for a few years with and known quite a lot of Christian leaders is most of them say, like, hey, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be like something unbelievable. Like, I'd be coaching football teams. I'd be a rock star. I'd be Richard Branson, I'd be running a multinational. None of them go, if I wasn't doing this, I might be middle management in Lloyd's Bank. Like, none of them, but that's the truth. That's the reality. Like, we just kid ourselves that there's this amazing life out there somewhere else. This is your life. This is your moment. You'll only ever meet God in the present moment. Yeah. Like right now, listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, it's not about what happened earlier. It's not about can you hear God speaking to you right now, even through me? Because it's in the present. God says, my name is I Am. Let's start to celebrate God now and not continually be thinking, oh, one day it will be better when I lose some weight, or when I, find the right partner, or when I have kids. It's just nonsense. It never comes. Just find God in the present and you'll be all right for eternity.
Amen. It makes me think of, I don't know if you come across him, James Aladdin. James always talks about God is my dream and what I do is just my assignment. But often it's been flipped in the church that this church or this ministry is my dream. And we sort of forget that actually, no, God is the dream. The relationship with God is the only thing that we take to heaven in the end, like you were saying. And he's the dream.
Yeah, the way I put it is never swap names with your ministry, or never swap names with your business. Like, you have a separate identity to that stuff. Do you know, one of the I'm going to let you into a real secret here. After some big 24/7 conference, or we just did wildfires, we'll get together for a few beers as leaders. And the thing we most often say is we have a laugh, we go, well, we got away with it. Like, once again, we got away with it. There's just a sense we're a bunch of hobbits going on an adventure, probably going to fail, but let's at least have some stories to tell. And then once in a while, we fail at failing and we do this thing they call succeeding, and everyone's like, whoa. But it wasn't ever about success or failure. It was always finding your friends and having some fun and going on an adventure together. So again, it's where I started. Find your identity in community, in relationships, in the people who know you best, and you'll be okay.
And one of the things you were just touching on, and just to wrap up, you were talking about sort of COVID, and I don't know if you saw the Denmark game the other day with Christian Eriksen and stuff like that. You know, when tragedy hits, that's when really the rubber hits the road with this stuff. That's where you're really confronted with, oh, life really is just me and God. And it's often people who suffered the most that are become more aware of that reality, and in the end hopefully have a more healthy view because they've been met with the real stuff of life. But the question I wanted to ask you is, you know, a lot of people know your journey and what you've been through, and I've talked a lot on this podcast about, you know, the tragedy of life and stuff. How do we get through that? But what I wanted to ask you is, how do we pray and maintain our relationship with God in an authentic way, so we're not lying to ourselves, but also at the same time we're believing in faith? And it's not that the two are diametrically opposed. You know, our faith calls us out of circumstance, but I don't want it to be this fake it till we make it sort of thing. But yeah, like, I'm just wondering, you know, how do we balance that? I'm feeling terrible. I'm feeling, you know, this is going on in my life, but I also want to have faith for maybe this person's healing or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the lie that people will tell you, or you may tell yourself, is that you have to choose between being fully real and fully full of faith. The human brain is utterly able to deal with paradox. And so, you know, it is possible to really believe for something, but also be realistic about when it's not working. The scripture I always go to, preached on this, I've written about this, so one or two people might have heard me talk about this, but I just love this verse. It's that beautiful story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And, you know, the king Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace unless you bow down and worship my idol, you know. And they say this cool thing. Do you remember? They say, the God we believe in, you know, is able to deliver us from the fire, and he's gonna. Like, read it, actually say, and he's gonna do it. I mean, it's like full on, like Pentecostal faith. We're going for a miracle. Like, yeah, it kind of is fake it and make it, name it and claim it. You know, it's like, it's fully in there. But then you've got to read on, because they say, the God we believe in is able to deliver us from the fire, and he's gonna. And then they go, but even if he doesn't, we still won't bow down. So it's like, well, what is that? Do you believe this or not?
Yeah.
Well, they're like, yeah, we totally believe it, but even if we're wrong, we're still going to behave with integrity. You know, and there's a couple of slightly more nuanced things in there. So, for example, we had a situation a few days ago where, you know, a friend, you know, his wife had a massive brain aneurysm whilst working in the food bank. She rushed into hospital. You know, he's sitting by her hospital bed. She's not come round since this moment, and it's looking bleak medically. And he just sends me a photo of his wife in this coma in hospital and says, Pete, how do I pray? I mean, that's quite a question. Woe betide the person who goes, oh yeah, I've got the answer to this. Like, you're advising a man who is sitting by his wife's bedside in a coma. Don't you dare, you know, roll out something that you've heard somewhere else, or something that rhymes, or, you know, it's like holy ground. A moment like that, what do you say to him? You know, and then really ultimately, I'm not going to go into the details because it's incredibly private, but I said to him, you know what, you need to let us have faith for a miracle, and you need to just live with the reality of what's right in front of you and what the doctors are saying, and potentially letting go and relinquishing and losing your wife. And so sometimes the way we handle that full faith, but also facing the fact, is in community. He needed to feel free to just not have to get his faith up. Do you know what I mean? And she did die the next day. And we were there, like, storming the heavens, come on, God, do a miracle. In Sammy's darkest days, we loved the fact there were people who still believed for a miracle for her, even though we personally couldn't get faith up for that, because we had to concentrate on just, like, getting dressed in the morning without having a full breakdown. Like, we just had to do life. So yeah, back to friendships.
Friendships, indeed. It's been amazing to have Pete Greig on the podcast this week. Welcome to the Preach What You Practice podcast. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Give this video a like. Comment down below what your favourite thing was about today. And if you can, support me on Patreon. You can get an exclusive look at my new book, Preach What You Practice, which is coming out very soon. You can get an exclusive look at chapter 1. So make sure you support me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/preach what you practice, or just click the link below in the description. But thank you so much for joining us today, and stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you next time.